Let's stay with the story. The UN Security Council will convene in the next hour to discuss the recent orders of the International Court of Justice against the State of Israel in what will be first an open session ahead of close consultations. The meeting is expected to emphasize the need for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza to give effect to the Hague-based Court's ruling. For more, let's speak now to our correspondent at the United Nations, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us live now from New York. Sherwin, there's a lot of speculation around what might be expected from the Security Council. But of course, why speculate when we have you there? Explain the possible scenarios that might emerge from the Council session today.
Bongiwe, a lot of confusion as to the role of the Security Council in the aftermath of the provisional measures handed down by the International Court of Justice. So to clarify, the Security Council will not be producing a resolution that will endorse the ICJ decision, because the ICJ decision doesn't need to be rubber stamped by the Security Council because it is already legally binding on the parties involved in the dispute around the Genocide Convention of 1948. The court has determined that it has jurisdiction, and so the order, provisional as it may be, is binding on the parties. So what you are going to hear for the first time is a ventilation of what is essentially before the United Nations Security Council, but also the international community. The ventilation from countries like the United States, the United Kingdom. What will Ecuador say? What will Mozambique say? Malta, South Korea, for example. We haven't heard from these countries in the aftermath of the ICJ's ruling, and whether the posture from certain countries, particularly Western countries that have supported Israel even in the ICJ proceedings, will their posture have shifted given the ICJ ruling? What we do understand is that Algeria, representing the Arab group in the Security Council, is now pushing for a resolution that will speak to a call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. You've heard from Dr. Naledi Pandor, you've heard from Riyad Mansour, the Palestinian envoy to the United Nations, in their position that for the ICJ decision to become active, you therefore need a humanitarian ceasefire for the prescripts of that decision to come to fruition. So we'll hear more about a humanitarian ceasefire. The briefer will be from the United Nations, will be Martin Griffiths, the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs. So you will see a push, I think, from a majority of council members for a resolution that speaks to the need for a humanitarian ceasefire so that the rulings of the ICJ can be activated by the council.
And speaking about that, Sherwin, the latest update from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs speaks to continued intense Israel bombardments from air, land and sea that continue in Gaza, with fingers pointing to the continued killing of hundreds of Palestinians each day, which on its face appears to ignore the rulings of the ICJ.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Bongi, where the numbers I have is that more than 700 Palestinians have been killed since the ICJ decision that called for Israel to adhere to the prescripts of the Genocide Convention, which included things like not killing members of the Palestinian group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of the group in whole or in part, and so forth. And so we are not seeing a change in the posture from the IDF in Gaza. The United Nations is still very concerned that not enough humanitarian aid at scale is getting into Gaza, commensurate to the need that we know is particularly in central Gaza and northern parts of Gaza. We read from that update that you refer to, Bongiwe, that humanitarian partners are observing increasing trends in denied access to northern and central Gaza, excessive delays for humanitarian convoys at Israeli checkpoints, and heightened hostilities in central Gaza. The broad message from that report is that humanitarians cannot do the work they are supposed to do, cannot function in terms of bringing relief to the 2.2 million people in Gaza that need this aid if the bombardments and airstrikes continue from the air, land and sea. And so you will hear continued language and certainly a narrative from members of the Security Council later in terms of the need for a humanitarian ceasefire so that humanitarian aid can reach the people that so need it.
And staying with that theme, showing in the broader humanitarian context, the Secretary General has called on member states that have suspended funding to the UN agency assisting Palestinians in Gaza, as well as the Middle East, to reconsider their decisions to suspend funding to UNRWA after serious allegations that we saw emerging that some of their personnel were allegedly involved in the October 7th attack on Israel. What's the latest in that regard?
Yeah, so the Israeli figures that, some 12 employees of UNRWA were involved somehow in the terrorist attack on Israel on October 7th. The UN has acted very swiftly. We are told that some 9 members have already been terminated while investigations continue by the Office of Internal Oversight here at the United Nations, while UNRWA, the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, already had announced that a review of their operations would commence. But the big concern now is that a number of the big donors, led by the United States and Germany and others, have announced that they are suspending their financing of UNRWA while this review takes place. And the concern from UNRWA is that need is only exacerbated. On the one hand, these very same countries are calling for greater humanitarian access, while then undercutting the agency that is best placed to make that make that come to fruition. And so the concern is that if that funding is not resumed, UNRWA will not be able to continue operations in Gaza beyond the end of February. So the needs here are acute. The funding issue is acute, and an interagency statement yesterday, the principals of an interagency standing committee called for funding to be resumed urgently so that the needs of those 2.2 million desperate souls in Gaza can be met by humanitarian aid.
And certainly one to watch, Sherwin, and also the developments in the Security Council. We'll catch up with you a little later on just to see how things are going there. That's SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease.